The phone rang 1 week after she disappeared. Her 15-year-old sister picked up. The number on the screen was Melissa's, and the voice on the other end was not Melissa's. It was a man, calm, unhurried. He asked the girl if she was a whore like her sister. The calls kept coming. For 5 weeks, from Melissa's phone, traced to Manhattan, to Madison Square Garden, to a town on Long Island called Massapequa. Each time the voice was controlled. Each time it escalated a little further. And then, near the end, the caller told Amanda Barthelemy directly. Her sister was dead. He was going to watch her rot. Police could trace the calls. They could not find the man behind them. They did not yet know that he was commuting past this stretch of highway every single day, that the same road where they would eventually find 10 bodies was the same road he drove home on from his office in Manhattan to his house in Massapequa Park, on the south shore of Long Island, where he had lived his entire life. He knew this road the way you know your own hallway in the dark. Melissa Barthelemy was 24 years old from Erie County in western New York. She had moved to the Bronx and was working through Craigslist, using the name Chloe. On the night of July 12, 2009, she met with a client. Afterward, she deposited $900 in her bank account. She tried to call an ex-boyfriend. He didn't pick up. That was the last voluntary act anyone can account for. Melissa had a mother who would later tell reporters she noticed the calls from Manorville on her daughter's phone records around the time she disappeared, calls to a location she didn't recognize, a rural corner of eastern Long Island she had no reason to know. She had a younger sister named Amanda, who was 15, who answered the phone. Megan Waterman was 22 from Scarborough, Maine. She had a 3-year-old daughter at home with family. On June 6, 2010, she told her boyfriend she was going out and would call him later. She was staying at a motel in Hauppauge, 15 miles from the beach. She didn't call. Amber Lynn Costello was 27, originally from North Carolina, living in West Babylon. She had been a strong student as a kid. She'd worked as a waitress. By 2010, she was struggling with addiction. A man had called her house several times, offering $2,500 for her company. On September 2nd, she left to meet him. Her roommate saw a dark green SUV waiting outside a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche. Maureen Brainard-Barnes was 25, from Norwich, Connecticut. She was a mother of 2. She'd been a seasonal telemarketer. She had been out of sex work for 7 months when an eviction notice arrived. On July 9, 2007, she called a friend in Connecticut from a Super 8 motel in Manhattan and said she was going to meet a client outside. She was 4'11" and weighed 105 pounds. These 4 women had different cities, different stories, different names they went by in that chapter of their lives. What they had in common, they had all advertised on Craigslist. They had all arranged to meet someone. And their bodies were all found within a quarter mile of each other along Ocean Parkway in December 2010, wrapped in burlap, laid in the brush beside a road that runs the length of Long Island's barrier coast. They became known as the Gilgo Four. The search that found them started with someone else. On May 1, 2010, a 24-year-old woman named Shannan Gilbert called 911 from a gated community in Oak Beach. She was frantic. She told the dispatcher someone was after her, that they were trying to kill her. She didn't give her location. She ran from house to house in the dark, banging on doors, screaming for help. Then she disappeared into the night. When Suffolk County Police sent officers to search for her in December 2010, they found the Gilgo Four instead. Shannan's own remains wouldn't surface until December 2011, in a marsh half a mile from where she'd last been seen. The community where Shannan vanished, a private gated enclave on Jones Beach Island, became the focal point. The 911 call, which police refused to release for more than a decade, captured a woman terrified of something in that house, in that neighborhood. Investigators scrutinized the man she had been visiting. They scrutinized neighbors. They investigated whether someone in that closed community had something to do with what happened that night. And Shannan's mother spent years publicly insisting her daughter had been murdered and that the same killer who took the others had taken her too. The theory had gravity. A gated community. A woman who was clearly running from something. A 911 call that police refused to make public. The official ruling accidental drowning that a separate forensic pathologist later disputed, pointing to damage to her hyoid bone consistent with strangulation. For years, investigators worked that angle, They worked the neighborhood. They worked the question of what happened inside that house on that night. They were looking in the right area. They were looking at the wrong people. Here is what no one had yet asked. Who knew this road? Ocean Parkway is not a road most people have any reason to use regularly. It runs along a barrier island. It connects nothing to nowhere in particular for most Long Islanders. The stretch where the bodies were found is dark and largely deserted at night, bordered by marsh on one side and brush on the other. Dropping a body there, 4 bodies, spaced carefully, wrapped in burlap, required more than a single visit. It required familiarity. In March 2022, investigators ran a vehicle description through registration records. Amber Costello's roommate had given police a description of the client's car more than a decade earlier. A dark green first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche. It had sat in a case file for over 10 years. The name attached to a matching vehicle was Rex Andrew Heuermann. He was 58 years old. He had grown up in Massapequa Park. He still lived there in the same house he had bought from his mother in 1994, a house neighbors described as increasingly run down compared to the surrounding properties. He commuted to Manhattan every day, where he ran an architectural consulting firm he had operated for decades. He drove Long Island's South Shore roads the way most people drive to work. He was not a drifter. He was not a ghost. He was a man with a business address in Midtown Manhattan and a residential address on the same island where 10 bodies had been found. He had lived his entire life here. His name had not appeared in any investigative file, not once. Investigators did not move on the vehicle registration alone. They built a case over the following year, piece by piece, using methods that had not existed or had not been deployed in the decade before. Cell phone records. Heuermann's phone showed contact with 3 of the 4 Gilgo victims. The records placed his device in proximity to the areas where they disappeared. An email account linked to him had been used to search for information about the Gilgo Beach investigation news articles, law enforcement updates, the progress of a case he had reportedly been following with sustained attention. Court records later revealed he had also searched for what prosecutors described as sadistic materials, and had searched for images of the victims and their relatives. Then came the DNA. Investigators retrieved a discarded pizza crust from Heuermann's trash. The DNA on it was compared to genetic material recovered from burlap used to wrap one of the victims. A potential match was identified. His wife and children were also part of the picture. Hair found on or near 3 of the victims was compared to samples taken from bottles recovered from the Heuermann family's trash. It matched Asa Ellerup, his wife. This told investigators something specific. Heuermann had been killing while using his family's possessions, or the victims had been in contact with environments he shared with his wife. Investigators confirmed that Ellerup and their 2 children were out of state during each period when the killings were believed to have occurred. He had been timing it. On July 13, 2023, Rex Heuermann was arrested and charged with the murders of Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. He was named as a suspect in the murder of Maureen Brainard-Barnes. He walked into a courtroom in Suffolk County, a man who had attended architecture school, built a business, raised children, and drove past these women's burial sites for over a decade, and he was charged with first-degree murder. The Gilgo Four were not the beginning. As investigators worked backward through the case, the timeline expanded in ways that changed the entire shape of what they were looking at. In November 1993, hunters found the body of a 28-year-old woman in a wooded area in North Sea, Long Island, 60 miles from Gilgo Beach. She was from Trinidad and Tobago. Her name was Sandra Costilla, and she had been living in New York City when she disappeared. Her body was discovered the day after she was last seen. DNA from hairs found on her remains eventually matched Heuermann. In June 2024, 31 years after her death, he was charged with her murder. Sandra Costilla was killed in 1993. Rex Heuermann was 30 years old. His architectural consulting career was just beginning. He had not yet purchased his childhood home. The murders that investigators had traced to one man were not the work of a predator who suddenly emerged in 2007. They were, according to prosecutors, the documented evidence of someone who had been operating for at least 17 years on the same island, in the same geographic range, commuting through the same landscape before anyone ever found a single body along that road. There were additional victims found in 2011 whose stories ran alongside this one. Valerie Mack, 24, who had been in foster care from an early age, who was the mother of a young son who was never reported missing because no one knew to look for her. Her torso was found in Manorville in 2000, her head and hands not recovered until 2011. She wasn't identified until 2020. Heuermann was charged with her murder in December 2024. Jessica Taylor, 20, was living in Manhattan when she disappeared in July 2003. Her torso was found in Manorville 5 days later. Additional remains were found in 2011. She was 20 years old. Her tattoo had been deliberately mutilated. Karen Vergata had been missing since Valentine's Day, 1996. Her severed legs were found in a garbage bag on Fire Island that April. Her skull was recovered at a Nassau County beach 15 years later in 2011. She went unidentified for 27 years until genetic genealogy finally gave her back her name. Heuermann admitted to her murder in his April 2026 guilty plea. The 8th killing he acknowledged, the one he had not previously been charged with. He confessed to it. There is also a victim who still has no name. Found in April 2011 near Gilgo Beach, close to where the first 4 bodies had been located. Estimated to have been between 17 and 23 years old, of likely Han Chinese descent, wearing women's clothing, dead for somewhere between 5 and 10 years before being found. As of today, that person has not been identified. They remain known only as Asian Doe. Investigators released updated composite sketches in September 2024, nearly 14 years after the body was found. No match has been confirmed. And then there is Shannan Gilbert, whose 911 call was finally released in May 2022, more than 12 years after she made it. The official cause of her death remains listed as undetermined. She is not part of Heuermann's charges. Whether the same man was responsible for what happened to her that night in Oak Beach is a question that has not been answered. On April 8, 2026, Rex Heuermann stood in a courtroom in Suffolk County and pleaded guilty to 7 murders. He admitted to an 8th. His sentencing is scheduled for June 17, 2026. He had been, for the years he operated, exactly what the South Shore of Long Island produced in the most ordinary sense. A local, a professional, a man who took the same road home. He is 62 years old. He has never, in any public accounting of this case, explained why. He has not explained the calls from Melissa Barthelemy's phone, the 5 weeks of taunting calls to a 15-year-old girl, the calculated escalation, the final statement that her sister was dead. He built his architecture career in the same city where these women were working and where he found them. He drove home along the same corridor where he left them. He followed the coverage of the case he had created. He searched for images of the victims' families. His wife, Asa Ellerup, filed for divorce in 2023 after his arrest. She and their children had no knowledge of what he had done. Investigators made clear that they were not suspects. They were, in the most precise way, collateral present in the same house. Their hair turned into trace evidence without their knowledge, their absence on specific weekends aligned with a calendar he was keeping in his head. Sandra Costilla was 28, from Trinidad and Tobago, living in New York City. She died in November 1993. Hunters found her the next day. It took 31 years for anyone to charge someone with her murder. Maureen Brainard-Barnes had been out of sex work for 7 months when she got the eviction notice. She called a friend in Connecticut the night she disappeared and said she was meeting a client. She was 4'11". Melissa Barthelemy was 24. She deposited $900 in her bank account that night. She tried to reach someone she trusted. She didn't get through. A week later, her phone started ringing in a 15-year-old's hand. Megan Waterman had a 3-year-old daughter waiting at home. Amber Costello's roommate saw the green Avalanche parked outside and remembered it. More than 10 years later, that memory became the thread that pulled everything open. Karen Vergata was last seen on Valentine's Day, 1996. She went unidentified for 27 years. Valerie Mack was never reported missing. She had been in foster care most of her life. She had a son. No one filed a report because no one in a position to file one knew she was gone. Jessica Taylor was 20 years old. The person known as Asian Doe has still not been named. One answer came on April 8, 2026. It closed 7 cases with a guilty plea and opened the door to an 8th with a confession. What it did not do Explain the full length of the timeline, account for every victim connected to this stretch of road, or resolve what happened to Shannan Gilbert in the dark of Oak Beach in the early hours of May 1st, 2010. These women lived on an island where one man knew every road, every marsh, every stretch of brush along the water's edge. They each made a decision to meet a client. They each had reasons for that decision: debt, children, circumstances that the official record often reduced to a category rather than a life. Rex Heuermann had an office in Manhattan. He had a house in Massapequa Park. He had a family who went away on specific weekends. And for 17 years, no one asked him a single question. These women were not statistics. They were not case numbers or Jane Does or entries in a timeline. They were people who made phone calls, had children waiting for them, deposited money in bank accounts, and tried to reach someone they trusted on the last night anyone heard from them. What broke this case was not one thing. It was a roommate who remembered a car. It was cell phone records. It was a pizza crust pulled from a trash bin. It was DNA technology applied to a case that had sat open for over a decade while a man drove past the evidence every single day on his way home. If that kind of story is why you're here, the long cases, the ones that outlast entire careers, the ones where the answer was hiding somewhere obvious and no one thought to look, then this channel is where you stay. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because we cover these cases every week, and we cover them the way they deserve to be covered, with every name spoken, every life treated as the specific, irreplaceable thing it was, and every fact verified before it's given to you. If this one stayed with you, leave a comment. Tell us which detail hit hardest. Tell us which woman you're going to remember, and if you want to keep watching, the next case is already waiting. Asian Doe still doesn't have a name. Shannan Gilbert's cause of death is still officially listed as undetermined. Some of this story isn't finished yet.